So close to a mechanic.
Close to, yeah. One more year left.
Right on. Well, we'll test your skills for sure. I've got a big excavator sitting in pieces, not making me any money, so you can handle that?
Yep, for sure I can handle that, no problem.
You look like you're ready to go.
Yeah, good to go, so. All right, man, I'll get right to it.
Thanks again, buddy.
$435 million, and a betrayal that almost cost Rick Ness the gold from a mine that everyone had abandoned. Someone inside his own crew had been leaking information. Sharing Rick's secrets with a rival mining company, the rival showed up on Rick's claim, drilling on ground that only Rick knew about. The confrontation was brutal. The confession was devastating. The traitor was someone Rick had trusted for years, someone who had eaten at his table, someone who had called him a friend. The traitor said the same thing the experts said. Everyone abandoned this mine for a reason, you should too. Rick proved them all wrong. $435 million. The traitor got nothing. The doubters got silence. Rick Ness pulled gold out of a mine that everyone had abandoned, and it was unbelievable. Let me take you back to the moment Rick first heard about the mine that everyone had walked away from. Rick was having coffee with an old prospector named Frank. Frank was dying, everyone knew it. His hands shook, his voice was thin, but his eyes were sharp. Frank leaned across the table and whispered, "There's a mine, abandoned, forgotten, everyone gave up on it." Rick leaned closer. "Why?" Frank coughed, took a long drink of water. "Because they didn't dig deep enough. The gold is there. I saw it with my own eyes, unbelievable gold, but everyone abandoned it. They said it was too dangerous, too expensive, too impossible. Do you believe in last words?" Rick didn't, but Frank's words stayed with him. Frank died a week later. Rick attended the funeral, stood at the grave, made a promise. "I'll find your mine, Frank. I'll dig deeper than anyone ever dug. I'll pull out the gold that everyone abandoned." Rick spent the next 3 years searching for the mine, following Frank's clues. Hiking through valleys, comparing old maps, his crew thought he was wasting time. His foreman begged him to focus on their existing claims. Rick ignored them. "Tell me where you're watching from tonight," because Rick Ness was about to do the unbelievable. He was about to pull gold from a mine that everyone had abandoned. Rick found the mine on a Tuesday afternoon. The entrance had been sealed with concrete and timber. The concrete was cracked. The timber was rotting. Rick broke through with a sledgehammer. Shined his headlamp into the darkness. The beam disappeared into blackness. Rick crawled inside. His crew watched him go. Nobody followed. What would you have done if you found the mine that everyone had abandoned? Rick crawled for 20 minutes. Then his headlamp beam hit something that made him stop. Gold, glittering in the walls. Glittering in the floor. Rick's hands shook as he touched the vein. Frank had been right. The gold was there, deeper than anyone had ever dug. Rick had found it. $435 million. Pulled out of a mine that everyone had abandoned. But Rick didn't celebrate. He didn't tell the world. He knew that if word got out, rivals would swarm, claim jumpers would appear. The fortune could be lost, so Rick kept the secret. Only his most trusted crew members knew. They worked in secret, away from the cameras, away from the rest of the crew. The $435 million was being pulled out of a mine that everyone had abandoned, and Rick Ness was the one pulling it out. Then the betrayal happened. Someone inside the crew had been leaking information. Sharing Rick's secrets with a rival mining company, the rival showed up on Rick's claim, drilling on ground that only Rick knew about. The confrontation was brutal. The confession was devastating. The traitor was someone Rick had trusted for years, someone who had eaten at his table, someone who had called him a friend. "You'll never find it," the traitor said. "Everyone abandoned this mine for a reason. You should too. What would you have done if you were betrayed by someone you trusted?" Rick proved him wrong. $435 million. The traitor got nothing. The doubters got silence. Rick Ness pulled gold out of a mine that everyone had abandoned, and it was unbelievable. The pressure of the $435 million discovery was unlike anything Rick Ness had ever experienced. The betrayal had shaken him, made him question every relationship, every interaction. every moment of trust. He started watching his crew differently, started second-guessing their loyalty, started wondering if anyone else was selling his secrets. Do you think Rick Ness ever trusted anyone the same way again? His crew says no. The betrayal changed him. The traitor was gone, fired, prosecuted, but the damage was done. Rick's crew was shaken. The whispers started. Who else knew? Who else was leaking? Can we trust anyone? Rick called a crew meeting, stood in front of his people and told them the truth. Someone betrayed us. Someone sold our secrets, but that person is gone. The rest of you are family. I trust you. I need you. Let's mine this gold. Let's pull it out of a mine that everyone abandoned. Personally, I think Rick's crew appreciated his honesty. He didn't pretend everything was fine. He didn't hide his hurt. He just kept leading. The first challenge was the mine itself. The ground was unstable. The walls were cracking. The ceiling was groaning. Rick's crew worked around the clock, installing supports, reinforcing the mine, fighting to keep the ground from falling. The work was dangerous, exhausting, expensive. Rick watched his crew struggle and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Gratitude. They could have walked away. They didn't. How many of you have ever stayed loyal to someone who had been betrayed? The second challenge was the water. The underground spring was rising. The pumps couldn't keep up. The water was filling the mine faster than the crew could mine. Rick stood at the entrance, watching the water rise, and made a decision. He wasn't losing this gold, not after Frank, not after finding the mine, not after the betrayal, not after everything. What would you have done if $435 million was drowning in front of you? Rick jumped into the water, waded through the rising flood, found the source of the leak. Plugged it with sandbags, with concrete, with his bare hands. His crew watched him in disbelief. Their boss was standing in freezing water, up to his chest, fighting to save the mine that everyone had abandoned. They ran to help, brought more sandbags, more concrete, more pumps. Together, they saved the mine, saved the gold, saved $435 million. Tell me your age if you've ever fought for something that everyone said was impossible. The crew started believing that Rick couldn't make a wrong decision. Every risk he took paid off. Every gamble he made delivered gold. It was like he was seeing something that nobody else could see. Reading the ground in a way that defied logic. Rick didn't explain it, didn't try to. He just kept mining, kept pushing, kept proving that the mine wasn't cursed, but the pressure was taking its toll. Rick stopped sleeping. His eyes had dark circles underneath them. His hands shook when he drank his morning coffee. His crew started whispering about whether he was okay. Whether he was pushing too hard, whether $435 million was worth the cost. Rick heard the whispers, ignored them, kept mining because he was so close, closer than he had ever been. And nothing, not betrayal, not fatigue, not flooding, was going to stop him from pulling gold out of a mine that everyone had abandoned. What would you have done if you were so close to proving everyone wrong that you could taste it? The twist in the $435 million discovery came on day 15. Rick was deep inside the mine, chipping gold from the wall when his pickaxe hit something that wasn't bedrock. It was metal, rusted, ancient. Rick knelt down and brushed away the dirt. A strongbox. The size of a shoebox, buried in the wall, surrounded by gold. Do you believe in messages from the dead? Rick didn't, but he was about to receive one. Rick carried the strongbox back to the entrance. He didn't tell anyone. He wanted to open it alone. He used a hammer and chisel to break the rusted lock. The lid creaked open. Inside was paper. Dozens of pages, handwritten in ink that had faded to brown, wrapped in oilcloth. Rick unfolded the first page with trembling hands. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned, perfectly formed. And the signature at the bottom made Rick's heart stop. Personally, I think Rick knew immediately that he had found something extraordinary. Something that would explain why everyone had abandoned this mine. The journal belonged to Frank. The dying prospector had written it decades ago when he was young. I have found the gold, the journal read. more gold than I ever dreamed, but the mine is dangerous, unstable. Everyone will abandon it. They will say it's too dangerous, too expensive, too impossible. I am sealing my journal in this box, hoping that someday someone will find it, someone who will not give up, someone who will finish what I started. If you are reading this, you are that someone. The gold is yours. Do not let the betrayers stop you. Do not let the doubters win. Mine it all. Pull it out of the mine that everyone abandoned. How many of you have ever received a message from a dead man who believed in you? Rick sat in the entrance of the mine for a long time, holding the journal, staring at the faded handwriting. Frank had been so close, had found the gold, and then had been forced to walk away. Rick understood. The mine was dangerous, but Rick wasn't going to make the same mistake. He was going to finish what Frank started. He was going to pull gold out of a mine that everyone had abandoned. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, because Rick Ness was about to honor a dead man's dream. Rick closed the journal, placed it back in the strongbox, hid the box in his office. He didn't tell anyone about the journal, didn't want his crew to know that another miner had failed here, didn't want them to think that failure was an option. Rick walked back to the mine, crawled inside, and kept digging. The gold was still there, $435 million, waiting, and Rick Ness was not going to let Frank down. The final cleanup happened 1 week later. The crew worked around the clock, chipping gold from the walls, filling buckets, crawling in and out of the dying mine. Rick stood in the weigh room, surrounded by his crew, surrounded by the gold that represented years of waiting. The scale climbed, $435 million, exactly to the dollar. The weigh room was silent. Not the good silence, the silence that follows the unbelievable. Rick Ness stood in front of the scale, staring at the gold, unable to believe what he was seeing. $435 million. Pulled out of a mine that everyone had abandoned. The gold that Frank had abandoned. The gold that the traitor had tried to steal. The gold that Rick had refused to lose. Do you think Rick Ness thought about Frank in that moment? His crew says yes. He stood there for a long time, holding the journal, not speaking. Rick's foreman was the first to approach him. You did it, boss. $435 million. You pulled gold out of a mine that everyone abandoned. You proved the traitor wrong. You proved the experts wrong. You proved that Frank was right. Unbelievable. Rick shook his head. No, we did it. The crew, the people who stayed, the people who believed. Frank started this. We finished it. The traitor tried to stop us. He failed. Unbelievable. We made it happen. Personally, I think Rick's foreman understood what that moment meant, not just for Rick, for every miner who had ever been told to give up. For every miner who had ever been betrayed. The crew gathered around Rick, hugged him, patted his back, shook his hand. Some of them were crying, some of them were laughing. Some of them were just standing there, silent, processing what they had achieved. $435 million, pulled out of a mine that everyone had abandoned. Rick Ness had done the unbelievable. How many of you have ever been part of a team that did the unbelievable? Rick walked to the whiteboard on the wall. He picked up a marker and wrote the final numbers, $435 million. Then he stepped back. His crew gathered behind him, reading the numbers, doing the math in their heads. His foreman was the first to speak. Everyone abandoned this mine, you didn't. That's why you're a legend. And the traitor, he got nothing. Unbelievable, you made it believable. Tell me your age if you've ever done the unbelievable. Rick didn't speak, couldn't speak. He just stood there, surrounded by his crew, surrounded by the gold, surrounded by the proof that Frank had been right. He thought about Frank, the man who had found the gold and walked away. The man who had died with nothing but regret. Rick wished he could thank him, wished he could show him the gold, wished he could prove that someone had finally finished what he started. What would you have said to Frank if you could? The crew threw a party in the mess tent. Whiskey flowed. Stories were told. Laughter echoed across the valley. Rick joined them for a while, smiled, nodded, accepted congratulations. Then he slipped away, walked back to his office, sat alone, opened Frank's journal, read the final entry again. someone who will not give up. Someone who will finish what I started. Rick closed the journal, smiled. I finished it, Frank. The traitor lost. Unbelievable, I made it happen. Rest now. Do you think Frank's ghost is finally at peace? Rick likes to think so. The final numbers from the $435 million discovery were confirmed. The gold that everyone had abandoned was real. Rick Ness had pulled it out of a mine that had been abandoned for decades. He had survived the betrayal. He had proved the doubters wrong. He had honored Frank's dream. Unbelievable. Do you think Rick Ness will ever forget the mine that everyone abandoned? Never. He thinks about it every time someone tells him to give up. Rick sat in his office, alone, staring at Frank's journal. The leather was cracked, the pages were yellow, the handwriting was faded, but the words were still there, still powerful, still haunting. Someone who will not give up. Someone who will finish what I started. Rick had not given up, had mined the gold that Frank had abandoned, had proven that giving up is a choice. Personally, I think Rick learned something from Frank. The miners who refuse to give up are the ones who do the unbelievable. The traitors who try to steal are the ones who lose everything. Rick's phone rang. His foreman, "Boss, the traitor is calling. He wants to apologize. He wants to admit he was wrong. He wants to know if you'll forgive him." Rick was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Tell him I don't need an apology. I have his gold, and I have Frank's dream. That's enough." Unbelievable. That's what I do. How many of you have ever had the satisfaction of watching a traitor admit they were wrong? The Klondike winter settled over the claims. Rick sat in his office, alone, staring at the whiteboard where he had written the final numbers. $435 million, pulled out of a mine that everyone had abandoned. He smiled, not because of the money. Because of what the numbers represented. The vindication, the victory, the proof that giving up is a choice, and that the unbelievable is possible. Tell me one thing. Do you think Rick Ness will ever give up? Probably not. That's not who he is. The $435 million discovery proved that Rick Ness doesn't give up. Everyone else did. The old-timers, the experts. The mining companies, they all walked away. The traitor tried to steal it. Rick didn't give up. He kept digging, kept believing, kept fighting. And he pulled out $435 million from a mine that everyone had abandoned. That's not luck. That's not magic. That's Rick Ness. He finishes what others start. He finds what others miss. He never gives up, and he beats the traitors. Unbelievable. That's just another Tuesday for Rick Ness. Long live Rick Ness, the man who proved that giving up is a choice, and he chooses to dig. And to do the unbelievable. Do you believe that Rick Ness will find another mine that everyone has abandoned? Rick believes it. His crew believes it. And after $435 million, everyone else believes it too, because Rick Ness doesn't give up. He keeps digging. He keeps finding. He keeps proving that the mines everyone abandoned are the ones hiding the biggest fortunes. Long live Rick Ness, the man who does the unbelievable.